About 3 years ago, I refitted my front door with a Schlage brand keypad lock, which is a kind of electronic lock. This is a model that has a standard key slot in it, so if the battery fails or the electronics fail, you can still use your regular house key to get in, but normally you would just punch in a keypad combination of your own choosing. And I found this to be a very good product, reasonably priced, sturdy, and so far it's held up beautifully with no problems for 3 years. So I decided to go a step further and apply similar technology to my walkout basement door, which, unlike this door, is more of a deadbolt style. It has two holes in the door, one for a regular door lock and one for a deadbolt. And I tried to find a product that would somehow integrate both of them into one, but I didn't find one. So taking both my locksmith's advice and Schlage's tech support advice, I put a normal unlocked, or let's say an indoor style knob in the normal position, which does not have a lock. It just holds the door shut without it actually being locked, and then put in a keypad deadbolt in the deadbolt position. So this is a little slideshow showing how I went about doing that, in case this might be useful to somebody else. And I should point out that all of my door locks on my house and garage were key-to-like, all using Schlage brand locks, so I had one house key for everything. And I wanted to keep that with these keypad locks. And as long as you stay with the same brand, especially with the Schlage, it's such a common brand, you can buy these locks anywhere. I bought mine always from Amazon, both for the front and basement doors, and then just took it into my locksmith, who happily modified the key part of the lock to fit my existing house key, so I didn't have to add additional house keys and carry them around, and this worked out really well. Here's my basement door with the original Schlage lock knob on the bottom, and then the Schlage deadbolt above. Once again, they were key-alike. The original deadbolt had become damaged, so I replaced it with a newer one, which is why it's shinier. But again, they were all key-alike. And here's a view of the same lock and deadbolt from the inside. And I should point out that most modern door locks of this general type are held together with just a pair of screws, which are accessible from the inside of the door. You want to make sure you don't install them backwards, in which case the screws would be accessible from the outside, and anybody with a screwdriver could take the lock apart and gain access to your house. But as long as you do it the correct way with the screws on the inside, you take those two out and the whole lock comes apart and comes out of the door very easily. For the main doorknob, which once again would not be a locking type, I went to Schlage's website and selected under the knob category the so-called hall and closet subcategory, which are basically knobs that are intended for doors with normal latches, but which you don't want to lock. They have another category for, outdoor knobs, and another category for bathroom knobs, and so on. But I used the hall and closet subcategory, and then from there picked one that I thought looked the least pretentious, which is what they call their orbit style. In other words, just a round knob with no extra trim on it. And here's the listing from their website that shows exactly what they refer to it by. And in my case, this was the F10, which is the basic type of knob, and then the ORB is the orbit, which is the round plain style, and then the 609 suffix could be any of quite a few different numbers. The 609 is the particular code for the antique brass finish. And I should point out that both Schlage and my locksmith said that these locks are built the same, whether they're ostensibly intended for interior or exterior doors, so the finish is the same, and the interior style knobs like this will work just fine on the outside. They're not going to corrode any faster or, you know, fail any sooner. They're just fine for exterior use as long as you don't need them to lock. And here's the box that it comes in. Here are the contents of the box. It includes the inner part of the knob, the exterior part of the knob, and the actual bolt and the striker plate, which isn't actually shown in this photo. Installation is simple. Just undo the couple of screws that hold in the old bolt and pull that out and put the new one in and put in the two new screws that are provided, and then assemble the internal and external knob parts and put in the two screws provided from the inside to hold it all together, and then optionally replace the striker plate in the door frame, which I did, just to get a matching color. For the electronic keypad deadbolt, I went again to the Schlage website and selected the electronic locks section, and from under that selected the keypad deadbolt subsection, and navigated through that till I found the one with the Plymouth trim, which was one of the plainer ones. I thought it would go well with the plain knob, and the one I actually bought was called the Plymouth trim keypad deadbolt, and here's the photo from the Schlage website, both internal and external views, and then the actual listing with the information. The model number in my case was BE365. The BE365 denotes the basic trim and options for the lock, and then the PLY defines the exact styling of the basically the shroud of the lock, the part you see, but the inner part's all the same with the BE365. And I should mention that the BE365 is one of the models that includes the option to have a standard key inserted into the deadbolt knob from the outside in case the lock malfunctions or the battery completely wears down and you still need to get in using your house key. And once again, I had this keyed to match my existing house key. And as with the knob, the 609 suffix denotes the antique brass finish, which I got to match the other part. But on this electronic model, there are more finishes to choose from than with the knob itself. And here's the box that the deadbolt comes in. Because the label includes information pertinent to my specific lock, potentially including some codes relating to its particular serial number and default access codes, I've blotted those out in the photos. And just as with the knob, the deadbolt comes out with a couple of screws from the inside, and a couple of more screws remove the actual bolt from the door. The box contains the inner and outer panels of the deadbolt and a Duracell looking but generically marked 9-volt battery for powering the electronics. And then there are all these loose pieces: the security reinforcement plate, the striker plate, the bolt itself, and various bolts and screws. Here's the exterior part of the lock, viewed from its inside surface. It has a flat shaft sticking out of it, which passes through the door and goes into the inner part of the lock, and it also has a cable coming out with a connector on the end, which gets fished through the same opening in the door and plugs into the inner part of the lock. A yellow label on the inner surface of the outside of the lock includes the programming access code as well as the 2 default entry codes which the lock comes pre-programmed with. You can use those, or you can delete them, or you can leave them in there and add additional codes. You can actually have quite a few different codes with these, and that allows you to have not only the ones for your own use, but also you can have additional ones. For example, you might want to let a contractor into your house when you're not there, or a maid service or something like that, and you could program a one-time code for them to use and then delete it when they're no longer going to have access. You can do all sorts of things like that. And once again, I blotted out the critical information on this photo. Now here's the inner surface, or the surface facing the door, of the inside part of the lock. And then here's a view of the same assembly from the side that faces inwards away from the door, with its orange plastic cover. To get at this, you just remove the outer metal shroud that covers it up, which is just a cosmetic surface. Just to the left of center in the photo is the dark colored circular area, which is where the flat shaft from the outside part of the lock sticks into when it comes through the door, and thereby couples into this part of the lock. And then the little handle you can grab from the inside of the door to operate the deadbolt also engages that same circular assembly, but from the other side. Just to the upper right in the photo of the circular part that was just discussed is a little rectangular opening which the cable fits through that I pointed out in the earlier photo. It passes through the door and then through that opening, and then gets to the side of this assembly that has the orange plastic cover. Through the same opening alongside the cable, the inner and outer parts of the lock are temporarily held together by sort of a plastic spring clip that sticks through from the outer part of the lock, passes through the door, and then has little plastic barbs that kind of ratchet into this rectangular opening, and thereby hold the two halves together while you're doing the rest of the assembly, so you don't have to have two sets of hands to do it all. It's kind of a clever arrangement, but when you try to pull them apart, the ratchets just release and it comes apart pretty easily when you want it to. This plastic area covers up the electronics. I presume there's some sort of a little circuit board underneath there. And the facing side of the plastic has several warnings and cautions and bits of information about things that probably have gone wrong in the past, so they make an extra effort to illustrate it here and avoid problems in assembly. The first thing to be assembled is the new bolt goes in with its plate, and assuming you've been using Schlage locks before or other models that use similar dimensions, it should go in just perfectly without having any chiseling or extra cutting or anything. On mine it just dropped in perfectly, and then the outer part of the lock slides into the hole on the door. Now the inner part of the lock goes on the door, and as I mentioned before, there is a plastic barbed piece from the exterior part that sticks into this part through the little rectangular hole and keeps it attached to the door so you don't have to hold it, and then your hands are free to work with the rest of the assembly. And the first step is to plug the cable from the outside of the lock to the little cable from the inside of the lock, so the whole thing is wired together electronically, and then plug the battery that's included in with the cable assembly, so it's all electrically complete. At this point, the instructions advise that the electronics should produce some beeps letting you know that they're alive and that everything's plugged together correctly. And you're also instructed to enter one of the codes to make sure the lock clicks its little solenoid, which is on the exterior part of the lock and operated by the electronics from the interior side of the lock. So this is just a sanity check before proceeding any further. With the initial checks complete, the battery snaps into a holder on the inside of the lock, and the cable assembly is just tucked into a space that's provided for it, as you can see here in this photo. Keeps it all out of trouble. And I should point out that in my experience with daily use, my front door lock gets at least a year out of its 9-volt battery. And actually, I've never even seen a low battery indicator, so I could probably get a lot more than 1 year out of it, but I just make a point to mark my calendar at the beginning of every year to put a new battery in it, whether it needs it or not. The push buttons on the keypad are illuminated by LEDs. I don't have any photos of the new Deadbolt lock doing this, but here's a photo I took of my front door lock with the LEDs illuminated in blue color to make the buttons visible in the dark. They light up with different colors, and depending on the colors can indicate a low battery condition, which is a warning when you use it, you know, that the battery is nearly depleted and you should change the battery before it totally gives up the ghost. So that's a nice feature. And I should also mention at this point that pushing the Schlage button, which is above the keypad, causes all the buttons to light up with a blue color. So if you're trying to use the lock in the dark, just hitting that will light up the keypad and you can see which numbers you're trying to push. With everything tested and working, now the cosmetic metal part, the shroud of the inner part of the lock, goes on and attaches with 2 screws, and that covers everything up. If you need to change the battery, it's just those 2 screws that need to come out to remove the shroud, change the battery, put the shroud back on with the 2 screws. It's very simple. And here's a view of the same thing with the lever turned so the deadbolt is extended from the door. I should point out that the inside lever is directly coupled into the bolt, so operating it will always operate the bolt from the inside. The same is not true of the knob on the outside of the door, and I'll get into that later on. The final step is to install the heavy metal reinforcement plate in the door frame, and this goes in with really long, heavy wood screws to anchor it to the stud to which the door frame is mounted. This is there so somebody can't easily kick the door in by just breaking the door frame. Now in my case, since I had a Schlage deadbolt in there before, the reinforcing plate was exactly the same as the one that came with the new electronic deadbolt, so I did not remove the security plate. Instead, I just installed the new striker plate over the reinforcing plate so it would match the color of the rest of the lock. But this is what it looks like. So here's an overview of the inside of the door with the new knob and the new deadbolt above it, and here's a view of the outside of the door with the new knob and the new electronic keypad deadbolt assembly above it. And here's a close-up view of the keypad. It looks just the same as the one on my front door lock. And at this point I want to talk about how the key lock works on this BE365 model. This knob on the outside of the door actually turns freely. You can just spin it around with your finger. It doesn't seem to be attached to anything. When you type in the correct code into the keypad, it energizes a solenoid inside the lock, which momentarily couples that free spinning exterior knob to the shaft that goes through the door, so then you can turn the exterior knob and actually operate the bolt. And after a few seconds that solenoid releases and the exterior knob is no longer coupled to the bolt. The same thing goes when you want to close the bolt, and you could set it up so you have to enter the keypad number again to close it, or just pushing the Schlage button will energize the solenoid again so you can turn the knob and move the bolt back in the closed position. Now if you're going to use the key in it, it's a little different. You insert the key and then you turn the key 90 degrees and then push it in and it locks in that position. And when it's in that position, then the exterior knob is coupled to the shaft and therefore to the bolt, and you can turn the knob back and forth and operate the bolt. To change that back so it is no longer coupled, you turn the key 90 degrees again and release it, and then the exterior knob is freewheeling once again, and turning it will no longer operate the bolt. So here's an overview of the two new locks on the basement door, and I want to clarify that my front door, where I've had the lock in use for 3 years now, that's covered up with a big roof over the porch, and it doesn't get direct sunlight most of the day, nor does it get rained on. Whereas this door on the back, or the basement door, has no roof over it at all, or awning or anything, so it's going to get rained on and snowed on, and it's going to be in direct sunlight at least part of the day. I checked with Schlage, and again also with my locksmith, who will install these things and has done many of them, and both of them said that these are designed to be out in the weather. The finish is designed that way, and the metal structure underneath and everything, and they are designed to be reasonably waterproof, unless you do something really outlandish with them, I suppose. But they said, yeah, there's no problem with it. They are designed for that environment, and only time will tell, but I have high hopes for this. It certainly makes it a lot easier when I'm working in my garden or my backyard, or even in my detached garage or the shed. I need to get some tools out of the basement, and I don't have to now remember to carry my keys around with me, or what I've been doing for years, go around the front of the house, keypad my way in, go through the house with my muddy shoes, down in the basement, and then unlock the door from the inside. This new arrangement should make all of that much easier. I hope you found this interesting.